Tess had never expected a quiet morning to lead to the most bizarre day of her life. She just stepped into the cockpit of her spaceship, feeling the cool metal beneath her fingers as she adjusted her seat. The dashboard hummed with soft lights, each one indicating that the ship was ready for another routine jump. As the captain of the Starflame, a small but well-equipped transport vessel, Tess was used to the mundane tasks that came with the job. What she wasn't prepared for was the sudden and completely unexpected appearance of an alien being in her ship's main hangar. It had all started with the weird flicker on the radar. A small, no bigger than a speck, blinked onto the screen, its coordinates wildly out of range from the nearest star system. Tess leaned forward, rubbing her eyes. A glitch? No, she thought, pressing a few buttons. The dot remained, stubbornly blinking. She double-checked the manual, then her sensors. A ship wasn't supposed to appear here. Her sensors were set up to detect space anomalies, but this wasn't any anomaly. It was someone. And that someone had just appeared in her hangar. There was no warning, no signal, nothing. Just boom, a strange burst of light and a sudden thump against the outer hull. It had been enough to send Tess stumbling from her chair and rushing to the emergency hatch. When she opened the door, she couldn't believe what she saw. In the center of the hangar stood a figure, her silhouette glowing in the soft, pale light. The alien woman was an imposing sight. She was taller than any human, with skin that shimmered like liquid sapphire and hair that cascaded down her back in silken strands of platinum blonde. Her eyes, glowing with an eerie blue light, locked onto Tess the moment the door slid open. Tess froze, staring at the otherworldly being in a mix of awe and fear. It took a moment before she could even form words. You're not supposed to be here," Tess managed, her voice shaking. "Who are you?" The alien woman tilted her head slightly, as though pondering the question. She was dressed in an outfit that shimmered in strange patterns, her body adorned with intricate markings that seemed to pulse with some kind of energy. Tess couldn't tell if they were tattoos, armor, or something entirely foreign. "I am Chara," the alien said in a voice that resonated in Tess's mind, not through her ears. It wasn't telepathy exactly, but something close, as though the words were being planted directly into her thoughts. "I come from the star system you call Alpha Centauri. My ship is malfunctioning. I need help." Tess blinked. She had heard stories about encounters with alien species, of course, but nothing that prepared her for this. The last thing she had expected was to find herself face to face with a real-life extraterrestrial. And not just any alien, this one was clearly intelligent, and she needed something. "Your ship malfunctioning?" Tess repeated, almost incredulously. "How did you even get here? And why are you here?" "I had no choice," Chara replied, her glowing eyes dimming as she looked down at the ground. "I was in pursuit of something, a being. But the entity I was tracking interfered with my ship's core. It's a long story, but it's too late to turn back now." Tessa's mind raced. The stakes were high. She'd always known that space was full of strange phenomena, but this was on a whole new level. Yet she couldn't just send the alien away. After all, they were both stranded in deep space, a vast and hostile place. There was no telling how long it would take for either of them to get back home if they didn't cooperate. "Okay," Tess said, holding up her hands in a gesture of peace. "Let's start with this. You said something about an entity. What exactly is going on here?" Chara's eyes glowed brighter, and the air around her seemed to hum with barely contained power. "The entity is a dangerous one. It is not of this universe. It is ancient, powerful, and it feeds on energy, living energy." Tessa's heart skipped a beat. "Energy feeding? How do you mean?" "I mean that it feeds on the very life force of those it encounters," Chara explained, her voice growing darker. "It is an invader, and it must be stopped. If not, it will continue to spread, taking more and more lives, until there is nothing left but emptiness." Tess took a deep breath, trying to digest everything. The stakes had just escalated far beyond anything she could have imagined. She hadn't signed up for intergalactic battles, and certainly not for hunting down some kind of entity that fed on life itself. But the urgency in Chara's tone, combined with the sheer seriousness in her glowing eyes, left no room for hesitation. "I'm going to need more information," Tess said, her fingers twitching as she considered the situation. "How do we stop it?" "I do not know yet," Chara admitted, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. "But I believe that your vessel is the key. Your technology is unlike anything I've seen. It might be the only thing capable of countering the entity's power. But we will need to work together." Tessa's eyes narrowed. "I'm not exactly a weapons expert. How are we supposed to fight something like that?" "The entity cannot be fought through conventional means," Chara replied. "But we can outsmart it. Your ship is equipped with certain systems that can generate energy fields capable of disrupting the entity's frequency. If we can draw it in close enough, we might have a chance." Tess swallowed hard. She was good with machines, but this was beyond her expertise. Yet, she couldn't just walk away from this. Not when the stakes were this high. Not when someone was relying on her. "All right," Tess said, her voice firming up. "We'll give it a shot. But if we fail?" Chara looked at her, and for the first time, Tess saw a flicker of something like hope in the alien's expression. "Then we will find another way." With that, Tess took a deep breath, turning toward the ship's control panel. She punched in a few commands, activating the ship's energy systems. But as she did, a low rumble reverberated through the hull. It wasn't from the ship. It was from outside. Something was approaching. Tessa's hand froze over the console as the noise grew louder, a sound that reminded her of something unnatural. Something hungry. "We're not alone," Tess muttered. Chara's glowing eyes flickered with alarm. "It's here. Brace yourself." Suddenly, the Starflame's hull shook violently, as though something massive had just collided with it. The warning alarms blared to life, and Tessa's heart raced. But this wasn't just a collision. This was something far worse. This was the beginning of the fight for their lives. Tess gripped the control panel, her knuckles turning white as the ship shuddered with each violent impact. The low rumble that had started outside was now joined by the unmistakable sound of something scraping against the hull. It was like a metal grating, but not from any human-made ship. No, this was something far stranger, and the horrible noise sent a shiver down Tessa's spine. Her mind raced. This wasn't just an unexpected visitor, it was the entity that Chara had warned her about. It was here, and it was ready to feed. But how had it tracked them so quickly? Tess had only just started the energy fields. Had it been waiting for them? Her thoughts were interrupted by another massive shudder. The ship lurched, and a sharp, high-pitched scream cut through the air. "What is that?" Tess exclaimed, looking at Chara, whose glowing eyes were wide with alarm. "It is feeding," Chara said, her voice low and steady, but full of dread. "It's trying to breach the hull. We have to move quickly." Before Tess could respond, the ship shook again, harder this time, almost knocking her off her feet. The alarm systems screamed at full volume, warning of a breach. Tessa's eyes darted to the control panel. The entity's energy was already interfering with their systems. If they didn't do something, the ship's power would be drained before they could even make a plan. "All right, we need to fight back," Tess said, rushing to the nearest console. She began inputting commands, trying to reroute power to the ship's shields. The control screen flickered as the interference from the entity grew stronger. "Come on. Come on." Chara stood silently, watching her, as though she had anticipated the problem. Her gaze flickered to the back of the hangar, where the walls of the ship were buckling under the pressure of whatever was outside. "The entity cannot be fought with force," Chara said suddenly, breaking the silence. "We must stop it at its source, its energy field. It feeds off of anything that generates power. It cannot be destroyed with weapons, but we can disable its ability to feed." Tess looked at her in confusion. "Disable its ability to feed? How do you?" Chara's glowing blue eyes narrowed as she moved toward the ship's control panel. With one swift motion, she placed her hand on the screen, and immediately the room was filled with a soft, pulsing glow. Tess stepped back, blinking in surprise. It was like the entire room had suddenly come alive. Your ship, Chara began, contains an energy core, a powerful one. But it is currently running on a conventional system. If I can connect my energy patterns to your core, we can create a disruption. A pulse. It will block the entity's ability to drain your power. Tessa's eyes widened as the implications sank in. Wait, hold on. You want to link yourself to the ship's core? Won't that overload the system? No, Chara said firmly. Your ship's energy core is not like any human-made technology. It is attuned to the patterns of energy in this galaxy. The pulse I generate will block the entity from drawing power from the ship. It will no longer be able to feed. But it is dangerous. It will push the entity into a state of frenzy. It will be violent. Tess stared at the alien, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She'd never felt more out of her depth in her life. But Chara's gaze was steady, filled with something Tess could only describe as determination. Do it, Tess said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. We have no other choice. Chara nodded once, and with a deep breath, she stepped closer to the control panel, her hands gliding over the console with an almost eerie grace. Tess watched in awe as Chara began to channel her energy into the ship's systems. The air around them vibrated with the buildup of power. Tess could feel the hairs on her arms stand on end as the room filled with an almost electric hum. Outside, the ship rocked again, harder this time. The scraping sound intensified, followed by a series of rapid, metallic thuds, as though the entity was trying to tear its way in. Almost there, Chara said, her voice tight with concentration. Tess couldn't help but glance nervously at the hangar door, as the sound of scraping grew louder. They didn't have much time. With a final push, Chara's energy flared up, and the entire room seemed to pulse in rhythm with her. Tess felt her stomach twist as she saw the energy field begin to form around them, its edges crackling with raw power. Done, Chara said, taking a step back. She looked at Tess, her face tense. It's done. Now we wait. But it wasn't over. As soon as Chara's pulse completed, the ship's lights flickered wildly. Alarms blared, and Tessa's heart raced. The air around them became thick with static as the entity, realizing its feeding ground was cut off, responded in kind. Outside, something large slammed against the hull again, followed by a long, drawn-out screech. Tessa's breath caught in her throat. The entity was angry, furious, in fact. Its presence was like a storm, battering at the ship with raw force. Tess could almost feel the pull of its energy as it lashed out, trying to breach the hull once more. Then, just as quickly as it started, everything went silent. The alarms stopped. The lights steadied. Tess blinked, trying to process what had just happened. It was almost too quiet. I think it's retreating, Tess said, her voice barely a whisper. Chara, still standing next to the console, didn't reply. She was looking out the hangar window, her glowing eyes narrowing as if sensing something beyond the ship. It's not gone, Chara said finally. It's only waiting. It knows we are here, and it will come back. But we now have time to prepare. We need to find its core. Right, Tess replied, her thoughts quickly moving from survival mode to strategy. We need to get to the heart of this thing before it can come after us again. I'll prepare the ship for the next phase. We need to figure out what it is and how to stop it for good. Chara nodded solemnly, her expression unreadable. Prepare yourself, Captain. The real battle is just beginning. Tess felt a chill run through her. She wasn't ready for this kind of fight, but as Chara's words sank in, she knew one thing for sure, she had to be. And if it meant putting everything on the line to save herself, Chara, and perhaps everyone in the galaxy, she was ready to do whatever it took. The silence was almost suffocating. The Starflame, once a vessel of confident hums and vibrant energy, now felt like a fragile shell. Tess stood in the control room, her hands tight on the console as the ship floated in the dark abyss of space. Chara, standing beside her, had her eyes fixed on the holographic map that projected from the dashboard, her glowing eyes narrowed in thought. For a moment, everything felt still, but Tess knew it wouldn't last. The entity outside the hull was still out there, lurking in the void, hungry for energy. They had bought themselves some time with the pulse that Chara had generated, but the alien's warning still hung in the air. It was only waiting. So, what now? Tess asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. You said we need to find its core. Any idea where to start? Chara's gaze remained fixed on the hologram. I've been tracking its energy signatures since we encountered it. It hides in the folds of space, its presence is fluctuating. It's not like a regular life form, Captain. It doesn't just exist in one place. It moves through space itself, feeding on the energy of stars, planets, and even the ships that pass too close. It doesn't have a singular form. But we can follow its patterns. If we get close enough to its energy source, we can pinpoint the core. Tess nodded, the weight of the situation settling heavier on her shoulders. It wasn't just some alien creature to deal with, it was a force that could manipulate space itself. A creature that didn't just feed, it consumed entire worlds. But how do we kill it? Tess asked. You said before that it can't be fought with conventional weapons. So how do we fight something that doesn't have a real form? Chara's eyes flickered, and her lips curled into a thin, knowing smile. Not all battles are fought with weapons, Tess. Sometimes, the greatest weapon is knowledge. We don't have to destroy it, we only need to trap it. Disable its ability to feed. Trap it? Tess repeated, incredulity rising in her voice. How? You want us to trap an entity that can manipulate space? That sounds impossible? Chara finished the thought. It is not. But it will require both of us to use everything we have. If we can stabilize its energy fluctuations, we can create a void. A place where it cannot feed. But we'll need the full power of your ship's core. Tessa's eyes widened as she pieced together the complexity of the plan. Her ship's core was powerful, more powerful than anything she had ever come across, but using it in such an unconventional way was a risk. Still, the idea of facing the entity head-on without any hope of victory didn't sit well with her. She turned to face Chara. You're sure this will work? Chara met her gaze with a calm certainty. It's our only option. Before Tess could respond, the ship lurched violently, throwing them both off balance. The alarms blared again, and the lights flickered. The scraping sound returned, louder and sharper this time, accompanied by an eerie, vibrating hum. It's here, Tess muttered, her heart pounding. It's coming in fast. Chara's eyes flashed with intensity as she moved to the main control panel. Prepare the ship's energy core, Tess. We have no time to waste. Tess didn't need any further instructions. She rushed to the console, her fingers flying across the buttons as she activated the core's power systems. The familiar hum of energy began to fill the room, but it wasn't enough. The entity outside was stronger now. Its energy was feeding off the ship, pulling power from every available source. Tess could feel it, the drain, the pressure. The ship was being slowly but surely sapped of its energy. Where is it? Tess hissed, glancing at the readouts on the display. I can't see it on the radar. It's not registering. What the hell? We're too close, Chara said suddenly, her voice sharp. It's hidden in the fold of space. We can't detect it until it's too late. But we can force it to reveal itself. Focus all of your ship's power into the energy shields. The pulse needs to be concentrated. Tess hesitated, her hand hovering over the button. Concentrating all the ship's power was a dangerous move. The shields were meant to protect the ship from physical threats, meteor showers, laser fire from pirates, that sort of thing, but they weren't designed to hold back an energy-feeding entity. But there was no other choice. With a deep breath, Tess slammed her hand down on the controls, activating the shields to maximum capacity. The entire ship hummed as its core surged, sending every last ounce of energy into the protective field. A brilliant blue glow enveloped the starflame, casting long shadows across the cockpit. Then, everything went silent. For a split second, Tess thought they had done it. The ship was still intact, and the glow of the shields seemed to push back against whatever invisible force was trying to breach them. But the stillness didn't last. A screech filled the air, so loud it seemed to vibrate through the very atoms of the ship. It was as if the entity was screaming, its frustration echoing through the hull. Tessa's heart raced as the lights flickered violently, and she could feel the ship begin to shake again. "There!" Chara shouted, pointing to the viewing screen. Tess looked up just as a massive shape appeared on the radar, a rippling form of distorted energy, shifting and undulating in ways that defied all known physics. The entity was emerging from the fold of space. Tess felt a wave of panic rise in her chest. It was too close now. The ship rocked again, harder than before. A bright flash of light exploded from the hull as a dark, writhing tendril of energy shot through the shields, its glowing mass moving like liquid flame. "Brace for impact!" Tess yelled, diving for the emergency controls. Chara's hands moved quickly, her energy pulses flowing through the ship's systems. The shields flickered as the entity's tendrils slammed into them, pushing the ship to the brink of collapse. Tessa's knuckles were white as she gripped the control panel, trying to keep the ship steady. "It's stronger than we thought," Tess shouted. "It's draining the core. We can't hold it much longer." But Chara didn't look worried. In fact, she seemed almost calm, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the growing energy signature outside. "Hold steady," she said. "The entity is feeding, but it is not in control. It's reacting to the pulse, trying to siphon as much energy as it can. We need to disrupt its feeding process completely. If we don't..." The ship lurched again, and this time Tess heard something crack, a deep, resonating sound, like the hull itself was beginning to split. "It's now or never!" Tess shouted. With one last surge of power, she sent everything she had into the ship's core. The energy flooded the ship, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though the entity was pushed back. The writhing tendrils pulled away, the ship's shields holding firm against the entity's insidious pull. But Tess knew that the entity wouldn't stay down for long. It was only a matter of time before it came back, stronger and more desperate. "We can't keep this up," Tess muttered, her voice thick with urgency. "We need to trap it now." Chara turned to her, her face serious. "I am ready. Prepare yourself." Tess nodded, knowing that the final confrontation was close. There would be no second chances. The tension in the cockpit was unbearable. Tess could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest like a physical force. The entity outside had been driven back, but only temporarily. The ship's energy was waning, its systems strained under the constant battle to keep the alien force at bay. Every moment counted. "We're running out of time," Tess said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "How much longer before it figures out how to bypass the shields?" Chara's glowing eyes narrowed as she observed the flickering screens, her face betraying no emotion. "It will not take long. It is learning. We must act now." Tess ran her hands over the console, pulling up every available resource on the ship's energy core and power systems. She could feel the hum of the ship beneath her feet, the vibrational pulse of the energy field still protecting them, but she knew the shield would only hold for so long. "We've already pushed the limits of this ship," Tess muttered, her mind spinning. "If we keep this up, we won't even have enough power to jump to another system. We'll be stranded." "That is why we must end this now," Chara replied, her voice low but commanding. "The entity feeds off of energy. It grows stronger with every passing second. If we don't act, it will become unstoppable." Tess clenched her fists, steeling herself for what needed to be done. "I'll do whatever it takes." Chara nodded. "We need to destabilize the entity's energy core completely. If we can do that, it will be unable to feed. The pulse I created in the core earlier is the key, but we need to amplify it, push it to the point where its energy matrix collapses." How? Tess asked, not sure she even understood how that was possible. We need to create a reverse resonance, Chara said, her voice steady. Your ship's core is designed to resonate with this galaxy's energy patterns, but it has a limit. If we can synchronize the ship's frequency with the entity's energy signature, we can reverse the flow. We will cause a collapse in its feeding matrix. But we will need every ounce of power the ship has left, and we will need to direct it precisely. Tessa's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to process the plan. It sounded impossible. But then again, everything about this situation had felt impossible since they first encountered the entity. There were no more safe options. They either succeeded now, or they didn't. Let's do it, Tess said, determination in her voice. Prepare the core. I'll do the rest. Chara moved with practiced precision, setting up her energy channels along the control panel and linking them to the ship's systems. Tess quickly ran through the final checks on her console, aligning the ship's energy to match the pulse Chara had earlier created. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she worked, but there was no time for hesitation. With one last glance at Chara, Tess threw the final switch. The ship groaned beneath them as the energy began to shift. The core hummed louder, growing in intensity, and Tess could feel the pressure in the air, like the very molecules of the ship were vibrating with raw power. Every system in the ship began to react to the pulse, the light in the cockpit flickering in time with the growing energy surge. It felt like the entire universe was holding its breath. Now, Chara whispered, her eyes closed in concentration. Release it. Tess slammed her palm down on the release button, sending the pulse cascading through the ship's energy systems. The lights flashed blindingly bright, and the entire ship shuddered, like it was caught in the grip of some cosmic force. Tess could feel the power surge through her, through every fiber of the star flame, and she gasped as she realized what was happening. Outside, the entity screamed. It was a sound like nothing Tess had ever heard, a primal wail that seemed to echo from the very depths of space itself. The ship vibrated violently as the tendrils of energy that had once sought to consume them recoiled, as though repelled by an invisible force. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze in place. The screeching stopped. The ship fell silent. Then the entity's presence, its feeding pattern, began to warp and twist, flickering out of alignment. Tess could see it on the screens. The energy signature that had once seemed so unstoppable was now fluctuating wildly, its balance disrupted. The entity was losing its grip. It's working, Tess said breathlessly, her fingers still hovering over the controls. It's actually working. Chara's eyes remained fixed on the displays, her face unreadable. But Tess could see the subtle shift in her expression, the faintest trace of satisfaction. We are not yet finished, Chara said. We must hold it for just a little longer. Keep the resonance steady. Tess nodded, her hands moving to maintain the balance of power. She could feel the energy building, the pulse intensifying. The ship was now more than just a vessel. It was an instrument, an amplifier. The very core of the starflame resonated with the entity's energy in a delicate balance, forcing the aliens' feeding systems to collapse. The entity howled again, its voice a terrible, thrumming noise that seemed to shake the very fabric of space. Tess held her breath, her hands tense on the controls. It was almost unbearable. The air around them felt thick with the pressure, as if the ship itself was on the edge of collapse. But Tess gritted her teeth and pushed forward. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, there was a quiet. The ship went still. Tess felt the hum of the core fade into a steady rhythm. The alarms that had been blaring for what felt like hours stopped. The ship, once on the verge of breaking apart, was calm. The energy signature that had once been so chaotic and violent was now nothing but a faint flicker. It's gone, Tess whispered, unable to believe it. Chara opened her eyes and looked out of the view screen. For now, she said, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. The entity has been neutralized. Its feeding mechanism is blocked. But this is not its end. It will return eventually, but we now know how to stop it. Tess leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. They had survived. They had faced the unimaginable and found a way to outsmart an entity that had seemed invincible. It wasn't the end of the story, but it was a victory, an improbable one. Chara turned to her, her expression unreadable. "You have done well, Captain. But you must understand, this is only the beginning." Tess nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She had no illusions about the future. The universe was vast, and who knew what else they might face out there. But for now, they had one. And that was enough. As the Starflame sailed into the empty expanse of space, Tess felt the weight of the galaxy lift from her shoulders, even if just for a moment. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Thanks for watching.